As much as I liked Thunderbolts, I wasn't surprised it flopped. After so much damage done to the MCU brand since Phase 4, why would most average cinemagoers care to see an Avengers B-Team movie? Captain America Brave New World before it was always going to be a flop because the film was heavily refilmed and reworked to the point where its budget became so massive it just couldn't recoup its costs. Also, if you're going to make a Captain America movie, it's probably best to have Steve Rogers in the role of Captain America. Finally, Fantastic Four First Steps is the third box office flop this year for the MCU. That's 3 in a row. And there can be no denying it at this point. You can see here on Box Office Mojo, the film has pulled in only $435 million worldwide. The film's earnings have dropped considerably. In its third weekend, First Steps brought in just under $16 million domestically. This drop-off from the second weekend to the third means the film isn't going to make back its production costs, in all likelihood. And this is what happens when you ruin the brand of your franchise. Fantastic Four First Steps was the best MCU film of the year. It wasn't great, but it was a good film in my opinion, and I liked that it didn't have the annoying tension-killing Marvel humor that has characterized so many MCU films over the years. It felt like a great throwback to early 2000s Marvel superhero films, and I really liked the retro 1960s setting. The world was brilliantly realized visually. They did a great job with that. The story wasn't anything amazing, but the execution, stakes, and performances more than made up for the generic nature of the plot. It was ultimately an enjoyable ride, but suffered from growing audience apathy towards this franchise. I said a long time ago that Fantastic Four needed to be a huge financial success in order to get the MCU back on track. It's not going to be, and therefore there's no real momentum to build on now at this stage as we move forward to next year's Spider-Man Brand New Day and Avengers Doomsday. There have been a few very forgiving critics out there, I'm not going to name names, who've tried to contrive the argument that it doesn't matter that the film isn't a runaway financial success. And they've made similar noises about James Gunn's Superman recently. They've said that we live now in a different time, streaming is a bigger part of people's entertainment lives, audience attitudes are changing, ticket prices are higher, and this is certainly part of it. I myself have talked numerous times in recent videos about those very factors. But you can't simply overlook the film's financial failure at the box office. These films are costing increasing amounts of money to make as the years go on, and they've gone from being, consistently highly profitable to being more often than not highly unprofitable, and in fact, they're often just loss makers. And all this just happened in a few years. Some people say, well, how can you call these films flops when they make hundreds of millions of dollars? Because they are flops. Because yes, they're making hundreds of millions of dollars, but they cost hundreds of millions of dollars more to make than what they're grossing at the box office. It's just basic mathematics, really. The studios are objectively losing money, so that's not sustainable, and quite honestly, reboots aren't enough by themselves. Okay, I'll admit, I liked the style of the Snyderverse films, even though I understand that wasn't everybody's cup of tea. I wish we'd gotten a few more of those films. But even I have to admit, that direction clearly wasn't working. It wasn't commercially viable. A decision was made by the studio based on the financial underperformance of those films, Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Justice League, to slowly end the DCEU and reboot the franchise into the new DCU. But rebooting isn't enough. Just starting the story over again with a new coat of paint and a new look and feel isn't going to change too much by itself, as evidenced by the box office underperformance of Superman 2025. And still there are those in my comment sections who deny the fact that it is underperforming. But anyway, costs must be brought down. We're not living in the golden age of superhero movies anymore, where these films are just guaranteed to make $1 billion. That time has passed. It's passed about 5 or 6 years ago. And yes, Superman has flopped. And for several weeks, the gap between domestic and international box office grosses have only increased. Internationally, the film has pulled in just $247 million, when compared to the domestic take of $331 million the film only made about $8 million domestically in its fifth weekend. It is going to be difficult for Superman to reach the $670 million that its predecessor made, Man of Steel. It could do that, potentially, but even that being said, when you adjust for inflation, it's not even close. Man of Steel has made considerably more money than Superman. But here's the thing. For all of those people on X who are willing this movie to beat Man of Steel in this sort of cringe culture war thing, as if that's some kind of fantastic achievement and barometer of success, it isn't. Man of Steel underperformed financially, so much so that Man of Steel 2 was cancelled and Batman v Superman was rushed into production instead. So even if James Gunn's Superman made $670 million like Man of Steel did, albeit not taking inflation into account, that will not be any kind of success. To say nothing of the reality that the film needs to make $700 million just to break even, and is quite a ways away from achieving that, especially given the rather harsh declines week on week. And what I find interesting is the narratives around both Superman films, Man of Steel and Superman 2025, which is two different perspectives. So it's quite odd. So no one denies that Man of Steel underperformed, although it was more a case that Man of Steel and its sequel, Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, fell below studio expectations. And expectations were key because they were banking on those films to be huge box office juggernauts, probably in excess of $1 billion, right? They wanted what Marvel were achieving consistently around that time. That's the kind of success they wanted to make. As it was, Batman v Superman grossed a sizable $874 million worldwide from a $250 million budget and probably, another $100 million for marketing costs. And that's 2016 money, 9 years ago. If it had grossed $1 billion, we probably wouldn't be sitting here talking about a DCU reboot, because a reboot possibly wouldn't have been made. But now, for some reason, expectations for Superman 2025 by James Gunn seem lower, and suddenly people are much more forgiving of the fact that the film isn't going to do any better than the early DCEU films like Man of Steel. Think about it. Warner were disappointed with Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, and indeed Justice League, so much so that they eventually ended the DCEU and started again. But the narrative going around now is that it's okay if Superman 2025 does similar numbers to those films. It doesn't matter if it doesn't do much better. Right? What? Even James Gunn himself has said Superman doesn't need to reach $700 million to be a success. This article is from Variety from July 7th. James Gunn says it's nonsense to think Superman will flop if it doesn't make $700 million. It doesn't need to be as big as people are saying. Okay, well, if only that had been the thinking back in 2013 when Man of Steel was made. The article says James Gunn's Superman is set to launch an entire new DC universe, but the writer-director is not feeling the kind of pressure one might think. Gunn, who is also the co-head of DC Studios with Peter Safran, recently told GQ magazine, as part of a cover story for Superman star David Cornsweet, that his movie is not the riskiest endeavour in the world, as some are painting it as. Is there something riding on it? Yeah, but it's not as big as people make it out to be, Gunn said. They hear these numbers that the movie's only going to be successful if it makes $700 million or something, and it's just complete and utter nonsense. It doesn't need to be as big of a situation as people are saying. Look, I acknowledge the film can make money from DVD and Blu-ray home releases and streaming, as well as merchandise, but that's always been the case. And that was true for Man of Steel as well. The yardstick for major motion pictures is the box office still, and that's where the bulk of the earnings come from. So it's a strange one, because it's like the goalposts are being moved around for Superman, and its financial performance is not being judged by the same metrics that Man of Steel was, despite the fact that Warner wasn't thrilled by Man of Steel's performance at the time. So maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe studio expectations really have changed. Perhaps you can help me make sense of all of this in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, hit the notification bell to be notified of future updates on the channel. Please share the video, take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.